Have you ever glanced at your grocery receipt and just felt sticker shock? That nagging feeling that the same stuff you bought last month, or even last year, has somehow gotten way more expensive? Or maybe you've noticed that filling up your gas tank takes a much bigger bite out of your paycheck. Well, you're not imagining things. It's a real economic force called inflation. That $100 bill in your wallet? It literally buys less than it did a year ago. This quiet, steady force is shaping your financial life, whether you realize it or not. It determines what you can afford, how far your savings will actually go, and even what your retirement will look like. But what is this invisible economic pressure, and why does it have such a tight grip on our wallets? In this video, we're going to pull back the curtain on inflation in simple, real-world terms. We'll get into what causes it, how it's measured, and most importantly, what it all means for you and your money. Agitating the problem. The shrinking wallet. Let's make this real. Picture your typical weekly grocery run. You walk in with the usual list: milk, bread, a dozen eggs, some chicken, fruits, and veggies. A year ago, that basket of essentials might have set you back about $100. Today, you grab the exact same items, but at the checkout, the total hits $105. Nothing about your food has changed, but the price has. That extra $5? That's inflation right there in your cart. And it's not just about groceries. The price of your morning coffee has probably crept up. Cost to heat your home in the winter is higher. Your rent or the price of a new car has jumped. Every one of these little price hikes adds up to a bigger trend: the rising cost of living. It creates this constant nagging financial pressure. Your paycheck might be the same, but it feels like you're having to run faster just to stay in the same place. This pressure creates a ton of uncertainty. How can you possibly budget for the future when you have no idea what things will cost next year? Trying to save for a big goal like a down payment on a house can feel like you're chasing a moving target. You might finally hit your savings goal, only to discover the price of the house has shot up, pushing it just out of reach. This slow drain on your purchasing power is the most direct and frustrating part of inflation. Your hard-earned money just doesn't go as far as it used to. Think of it like a silent thief, slowly stealing value from your wallet. And you're not alone in this. It's a shared reality for households everywhere, which makes it so important to understand what's driving these changes. What is inflation? The simple definition. So, what exactly is this force that's making our money feel lighter? Put simply, inflation is the speed at which prices for pretty much everything are going up. And when prices go up, the purchasing power of your money goes down. The key word here is general. Inflation isn't just when one thing, like gas, gets more expensive. It's a widespread increase in prices for goods and services across the entire economy. Let's go back to that cup of coffee. If it cost $3 last year, and this year it's $3.15, the price went up by 15 cents. For that coffee, that's a 5% inflation rate. Now, imagine that same kind of price bump happening to thousands of other things. From haircuts and movie tickets to cars and doctor's visits, and the average price of all that stuff goes up. That's what we call economy-wide inflation. Here's another way to think about it. Money is a tool we use to buy things. With inflation, that tool gets a little weaker. Every dollar you have claims a slightly smaller piece of the economic pie than it did before. This is why you always hear economists and financial experts talking about inflation. It's a core measure of an economy's health and directly hits the financial well-being of every single person. Now, a little bit of inflation is usually seen as normal, even healthy for an economy. Most experts aim for around 2%. But when inflation gets high, it can cause some serious problems by squeezing household budgets and creating a lot of economic instability. How is inflation measured? The basket of goods? If inflation is this big, general rise in prices, how on earth do we measure it? It's not like anyone can track the price of every single thing sold in the country. So instead, government statisticians use a pretty smart method called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Picture a giant imaginary shopping basket. This basket is meant to represent what a typical family buys in a month. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, fills this basket with thousands of specific items. They actually collect over 80,000 price quotes every single month. And this basket has a little bit of everything to reflect how people really spend their money. It's got groceries, clothes, housing costs, transportation, medical care, and even recreation. Of course, not everything we buy has the same impact on our budget. You probably spend a lot more on rent each month than you do on postage stamps, right? To make it accurate, every item in the CPI basket is weighted based on how much of the average household's budget it takes up. So, a jump in gas prices or rent will affect the overall number a lot more than a jump in the price of milkshakes. Each month, the statisticians check the prices of everything in the basket. They add up the total cost and compare it to what that same basket cost last month and last year. The percentage change in the price of that basket over time is the inflation rate. For instance, the annual inflation rate in the US for the 12 months, ending in May 2025, was 2.4%. This number, the CPI, is a huge deal. The government uses it to make policy decisions, businesses use it to set prices and wages, and it's what central banks look at to help manage the economy. It even affects things like adjustments to Social Security payments to make sure they keep up with the cost of living. By tracking this basket of goods, we get a really solid snapshot of how much the cost of living is actually changing for the average person. Why does inflation happen? The main causes. Trying to figure out what causes inflation can feel complicated, but it usually boils down to a few key things. Think of them in three main buckets: demand pull, cost, push, and built-in inflation. First up, demand pull inflation. This is the classic too much money chasing too few goods. It happens when everyone wants to buy stuff, but there isn't enough to go around. Imagine a brand new gaming console drops, but there's a limited supply. Everybody wants one, so people are willing to pay way more than the sticker price. That high demand pulls the price up. Now, scale that up to the whole economy. When people have more money to spend, maybe from a government stimulus or because low interest rates make it cheap to borrow, they go out and buy more things. If businesses can't produce goods fast enough to keep up with all that demand, prices will naturally start to rise. We saw a lot of this after the COVID-19 pandemic, when stimulus money and a shift in spending habits caused a huge spike in demand for goods. Next, there's cost, push, inflation. This one comes from the other side of the equation, the supply. It happens when it gets more expensive for businesses to make things, and they have to pass those extra costs on to us, the consumers, with higher prices. Let's go back to our coffee shop. If the price of coffee beans and milk goes up, or if the energy bill to run the espresso machine gets higher, the shop's costs increase. To stay in business, they have to charge more for a cup of coffee. It's not because more people are suddenly craving lattes. It's because the cost to make the latte went up. Big drivers of cost-push inflation can be things like rising wages, higher taxes, or a spike in the price of raw materials like oil. The supply chain chaos during the pandemic was a perfect example of this, as it made it much more expensive to produce and ship goods. Finally, we have built-in inflation, which is all about our expectations. This can create a cycle that's often called a wage price spiral. Here's how it works. If everyone expects prices to go up, workers will start demanding higher wages so they can keep up with the cost of living. To cover those higher labor costs, businesses then raise their prices. But that just confirms what everyone expected in the first place, leading workers to ask for another raise. And so, the cycle continues. This kind of inflation feeds on itself, showing how our collective mindset about the future can be a really powerful economic force. How inflation directly affects you. The real-world impact. Okay, so we know inflation makes stuff more expensive, but its effects create ripples in every corner of your financial life, in ways that are both obvious and a little sneaky. First, the most direct hit is to your savings and purchasing power. This is where inflation plays the role of the silent thief. Any money you have sitting in a standard savings account is losing value. Let's say your savings account pays you 1% interest for the year, but the inflation rate is 3%. In reality, you've lost 2% of your purchasing power. Sure, the number in your account went up, but what that money can actually buy has gone down. This is why just stashing cash is rarely a good strategy for building wealth over the long term. Your savings need to grow faster than inflation, just to hold their ground. Next up is the effect on debt and loans. And this one is a weird, double-edged sword. If you're a borrower with a fixed-rate loan, like a 30-year mortgage, inflation can actually be a good thing. You borrowed a chunk of money when it was worth more, but you're paying it back over many years with money that's worth less. Your mortgage payment stays the same, but your income will likely rise with inflation over time. making that fixed payment feel smaller and more manageable. But for anyone with variable rate debt, like an adjustable rate mortgage or a credit card balance, it's a different story. To fight inflation, central banks often raise interest rates. It means the interest on your debt will go up, leading to higher monthly payments. This brings us to investments. Inflation is a huge factor for any investor. Assets that pay out a fixed amount of money, like bonds, can get hit hard by surprise inflation. Because those fixed payments buy less and less over time, and as we've said, cash is a terrible performer. On the flip side, some assets are known as good hedges against inflation. Stocks can do well because companies can often pass their increased costs on to customers and grow their revenue right along with inflation. And real assets like real estate or commodities like gold and oil also tend to see their prices rise when inflation is high. Finally, and this is really important, inflation does not affect everyone equally. It tends to hit low-income households the hardest. Why? Because a much larger chunk of their budget goes toward absolute necessities like food, gas, and utilities. These are often the categories that see the biggest price swings. When the cost of these essentials goes up, there's very little fat to trim from their budget, which puts a massive strain on their financial stability. Higher-income households, who spend a smaller percentage of their money on necessities, have a lot more wiggle room to absorb those price hikes. Taming the beast? How is inflation controlled? Since inflation is such a powerful force, it's probably no surprise that governments and central banks work hard to keep it from getting out of control. The main institution in charge of this job is a country's central bank for the U.S. That's the Federal Reserve, or the Fed. The number one tool a central bank uses to wrangle high inflation is adjusting interest rates. When inflation is running too hot, the central bank will raise its main interest rate. This might sound a little abstract, but it causes a chain reaction across the entire economy. That rate is what banks get charged to borrow from the central bank. So when it goes up, banks turn around and charge their customers more. This makes borrowing more expensive for everybody. Mortgages, car loans, and business loans all get pricier. The whole point is to cool down the economy by tamping down on demand. When it costs more to borrow, people and businesses are less likely to take out loans for big purchases or investments. This slowdown in spending gives the supply side a chance to catch up with demand, which helps put the brakes on price increases. On the other hand, if the economy is sluggish and inflation is too low, the central bank can cut interest rates. This encourages borrowing and spending, which helps get the economic engine going again. The goal isn't to get rid of inflation completely. Most economists agree that a small, steady amount of inflation, usually around that 2% target, is actually a good thing. It nudges people to spend and invest instead of hoarding cash. And it makes it easier for wages and prices to adjust over time. The real challenge is finding that delicate balance, keeping the economy humming along without letting it overheat. It's a constant balancing act to ensure both growth and stable prices for everyone. If this breakdown helped you finally get a clear handle on what inflation is and how it actually works, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel get out to more people who are trying to navigate these tricky topics. And for more simple guides to money, finance, and the economy, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What's the one thing you've noticed getting crazy expensive lately? Let's talk about it. So, let's wrap this up. Inflation isn't just some boring economic term you hear on the news. It's the real, tangible reason your money doesn't go as far as it used to. It's that general rise in prices across the economy, pushed and pulled by supply and demand. The costs of production, and even our own expectations. It touches every part of our financial lives. It chips away at our savings. It changes the game for our debts. It shapes our investment strategies. And unfortunately, it hits those with the lowest incomes the hardest. But here's the thing. Understanding inflation is the first and most powerful step you can take to manage its effects. By knowing what it is and how it works, you're in a much better position to make smart decisions with your money. You can plan your budget better, think more strategically about saving and investing, and handle your debt with a clear-eyed view. Inflation is a permanent part of our economic reality, but with a little knowledge, it doesn't have to be scary or confusing. It can just be another thing you plan for on your path to financial well-being.